Mega Drive profile. Welcome to the next level.
Today on Mega Drive Profile, we are taking a fine look at the adventures of Batman and Robin for the Genesis. This game was recommended to me by my viewers, so thanks a lot for that. Okay, let's get started.
Gameplay.
The Adventures of Batman and Robin is a 2D running gun by developer Clockwork Tortoise. You will fight through 5 stages facing off against Gotham's adversaries such as the Joker and Two-Face. I don't know about you guys, but when I first played this title, I noticed instantly how similar it is to Gunstar Heroes. Of course, there are some key differences, so I'll explain how this works. Being that this is primarily a run and gun game, you'll be doing a lot of shooting with your trusty batarangs. Unlike most games in the genre, you can't run and shoot at the same time. Instead, you're relayed to a fixed position, allowing you to aim in 8 directions, just like the second player in Gunstar. This might sound inconvenient depending on the player, but I assure you it's in your best interest as enemies spawn in odd directions and are quite nimble at that. I am dead serious too. This game will make you its bitch easily if you aren't careful. I consider myself pretty experienced with this genre, and it still gave me a run for my money. It's not an issue at all. In fact, I feel it's the opposite, as it keeps the player's skills tip-top and checked. Recently, players have been getting a good taste of that with Cuphead, so it's good to know that a game in 2017 doesn't encourage handholding, but relying instead on the player's own determination and skill to win. Speaking of, what does it take to beat Batman and Robin? Well, it starts with this flashing bar you see here. Firing while this is full unleashes a charged batarang, capable of piercing through several enemies at once. While this move is extremely practical for crowd control, you won't always have the luxury of time as enemies fill the screen easily. Thankfully, power-ups are thrown into the fray to assist the player. There are 3 different batarang powers you can pick up: a red, blue, and green disc. Picking up another of the same color disc levels up your weapon. You can do so up to 6 times, and picking up a different color switches your batarang type. The other power-ups include this skull. Grabbing it initiates a kill screen, clearing out all enemies in sight. What's even more useful is the Supercharger Power. Grabbing this gives you unlimited special bars, allowing you to shoot charged shots almost instantly for a short amount of time. You can already tell this is something you want to pick up whenever possible. Batman and Robin are also able to perform melee attacks when enemies are in close proximity, similar to games like Shinobi. This is also where the Gunstar comparison reflects the most, as you can easily manipulate air kicks to move your character faster and cancel animations. Melee attacks are also stronger than your standard batarang and proves effective against particular enemies and bosses. Do your best to not get carried away, because the hitbox is a bit strange and damage taken will go unnoticed when in the midst of action, so pay attention to your life counter. You start with 2 lives, and once you are out, it's back to the start of the stage. Extends are pretty scarce, so you really do have to play your ass off. If you take a look at the options menu, you'll notice there is no difficulty setting and are given 6 credits by default, so the expectation is being made obvious for the player. I mentioned earlier that there are 5 stages to go through, and while that sounds short, the levels are divided into several sections. These sections contain mini-bosses to battle against before you go on to defeat the main villain of the stage. The mini-bosses are just as relentless as the main ones, so don't let your guard down for 1 second, because underestimating them will get you trashed. The attack patterns are fast and wisely programmed, so quick thinking and good reflexes are a definite must to succeed. There is some variety with the gameplay when you take control of the backglider in the shoot 'em up segments. These parts of the game are infamous for being quite long, with approximately 10 to 15 minutes of game time, depending on how fast you kill the bosses. On top of this, there are no checkpoints either, so you must complete it in one sitting, otherwise it's back to the very start you go. In conclusion, The Adventures of Batman and Robin is a great game with a demanding challenge. I definitely recommend this one, but you are going to need some experience under your belt if you plan to beat it. It's pretty much designed for the run and gun expert, and I really mean this. I barely managed to beat this game, but it's also one of my biggest gaming accomplishments. Thanks again to those who recommended it. It's freaking awesome.
Graphics.
The folks over at Clockwork take the precedent of amazing and transform it into incredibly outstanding. The praise for the game's graphics are frequently mentioned in almost all videos surrounding it, and it really deserves it. Everything from the intro cutscene to the boss fights showcase how well the dev team understood the machine's hardware. Special effects like background rotation, parallax, and real-time scaling are rendered with ease and virtually no slowdown in sight. Fans of Batman will not be disappointed with the art direction as it faithfully stays true to its universe. In an interview with Sega 16, former Clockwork artist Chris George talks a little about his role and experience working on the game's art. I quote, "My first job was at a small studio called Malibu Interactive, where for a short time I worked on a few unreleased games based on licenses from Malibu Comics. A group of guys from Malibu had just left to start their own company called Clockwork Tortoise, and I went to go work for them shortly after they landed the Batman and Robin project from Sega. One of the pieces of the game that I'm most proud of was the Cheshire Cat Bus. It was the only boss character that the art director let me do the art for. I busted my butt for that one, and I think it paid off. We would scan them in, and I was responsible for going over them frame by frame to turn the scanned drawings into sprites. The technical achievements in Batman and Robin were due to the programming prowess of John O'Brien, the lead programmer at Clockwork. His technical abilities actually drove the game design. He would make some amazing effect, and we would find a way to showcase it in the game. I think half of the bosses in the game were initially his idea, because he would think of some cool effect. I think it's safe to say that if you don't like Batman and Robin from a gameplay perspective, we can at least agree that it's absolutely beautiful to look at. Thanks to O'Brien, the mastermind behind the coolest effects ever seen in a Mega Drive game.
Music and sound.
The man behind the music is none other than renowned composer Jesper Kyd, who is known for his original scores on the Assassin's Creed and Hitman series. In the late 80s, he was involved in the Amiga demo scene and joined a talented group of programmers who established a team called Zyrinx in 1993. The members of Zyrinx are known for producing the Silence and Cryonics demo called Hardwired for the Amiga. Some of the graphics introduced in this demo would make its way into games like Red Zone and Subterranea for the Genesis. While the effects are impressive, so is the audio. Jesper would take his knowledge and develop what is known as the Zyrinx driver and use it in the aforementioned games, including of course Batman and Robin. The soundtrack to Batman is absolutely incredible. A good way to describe it is taking bits and pieces of Streets of Rage and injecting it with a dark twist. Possibly the most impressive thing, however, is that it only uses the FM channels with no PSG or PCM assistance. This is easily some of the heaviest audio the Mega Drive has pumped out. From the kicks, snares, and humongous bass lines, let's check out the music that defines Batman and Robin.
Development and philosophy.
The Adventures of Batman and Robin was developed by Clockwork Tortoise Inc. This company was founded by several ex-members of a studio called Malibu Interactive, who had already developed several titles for the Genesis, like Battletech and the unreleased Time Tracks. The lead producer of Clockwork was James Maxwell. His team managed to strike a deal with Sega to produce a game based on the Batman license for the Genesis and Sega CD. Even though they bear the same title, they are completely different games. The CD version has you taking control of the Batmobile through several levels in a real arcade-like fashion. The most interesting thing about this game is the fact that it contains new animation and dialogue by the original staff of the cartoon. These FMV sequences are known to fans as the Lost Episode. It may sound like Clockwork was running things well internally. The truth is that from the start, things were getting too comfortable with its own employees and Sega of America. During development of both games, the team was constantly reminded of their missed milestones by Sega. It got to the point that in order to instill pressure, President of Sega Tom Kalinske appointed a meeting with them. It also did not help that while James Maxwell was extremely passionate about making games, the same could not be said about his management skills. The project was already late by 6 months, but they still received checks from Sega despite never meeting a milestone on time. Chris George recalls O'Brien saying that if they did not send them payment, he would cancel work on the game immediately. Since development was so far into production, Sega caved into O'Brien's demands. The Adventures of Batman and Robin was released in 1995 in North America, Europe, Australia, Asia, and the Brazil regions. Its Sega CD counterpart would also be released in these countries, with the exception of Australia and Asia. The game would also receive a port to the Game Gear. This version of the game was not handled by Clockwork, but instead by a developer named Novatrade. Batman and Robin would also make its way to the SNES, although its atmosphere and gameplay are more faithful to the original cartoon. Fans to this day still debate about which version of the game is better. I will say that the Genesis version is regarded as one of the hardest, but also the most technically impressive game to ever grace the console. It has now become one of my favorite games, and big thanks to my viewers for suggesting it once again.